Hi, I'm Keir Graff. Welcome to the Filmographers podcast, the show where we study a director's entire career, one film at a time.
And I'm Michael Moreci. In our first season, we shined our spotlight on Steven Soderbergh, one of modern Hollywood's most fascinating and versatile directors. In our second season, we're giving the close-up to Billy Wilder, not only one of the most significant auteurs of Golden Age of Hollywood, but a candidate for one of the greatest directors of all time.
We believe that in time, Soderbergh will be recognized as one of the all-time greats, but Wilder is already a no-doubter.
Listeners, if you want to know more about why we chose Wilder, check out our announcement episode. But most likely, you already know why. He's the GOAT. He's the best. And over the course of this season, we're going to explain why.
We're starting with a biographical episode that covers Wilder's life right up to the moment he left for Hollywood. We think it will deepen your appreciation of Wilder if you know a little bit more about who he is and where he came from. He may have an image as an impish, devil-may-care jokesmith, but he's a lot more complicated than he seems.
Keir, it's no secret that both you and I champion physical media.
We do, Mike. We love having movies on our shelves, we love the tactile experience, and we love getting lost in bonus features that you'll never find in a streaming library.
We have many favorite Blu-ray and 4K distributors, and chief among them is Vinegar Syndrome, who not only distributes cinematic gems, but they lovingly restore them as well.
Vinegar Syndrome boasts a wonderfully eclectic blend of exploitation essentials like Tammy and the T-Rex and Flesh for Frankenstein,
as well as classics like Michael Mann's The Keep, Elaine May's A New Leaf, and one of my personal favorites, Dirty Work, starring the great Norm Macdonald.
And let's not forget one of my personal favorites, John Dahl's Red Rock West.
They even carry Revealer, a movie I co-wrote with Tim Seeley. Like all of Vinegar Syndrome's releases, it's packed with extras. You can feel the care they put into each and every title in their catalog.
If you love movies, and if you love physical media, you're going to want to check out Vinegar Syndrome's entire library. Visit them at vinegarsyndrome.com. That's vinegarsyndrome.com.
Billy Wilder died on March 27, 2002 at the age of 95. After making 24 films, he received a total of 21 Academy Award nominations and 7 wins, including Best Picture, Best Director twice, and Best Screenplay 3 times. In 1986, he received the AFI Lifetime Achievement Award. In 1987, he was honored with the Irving G. Thalberg Memorial Award. He received the Kennedy Center Awards in 1990 and the National Medal of Arts in 1993. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Not only did he earn the recognition of his peers while he was alive, but his name has gone down in history. His films Double Indemnity, Some Like It Hot, and Sunset Boulevard are routinely cited as some of the best films ever made.
And I do think it's interesting that he won more Oscars as a writer than he did as a director.
Mike, we may be talking about writing almost as much as directing this season because Wilder co-wrote every single film he directed.
It's interesting how many of the people we think of as being the quintessential directors, your Wells, Kubrick, Scorsese, Spielberg, Fincher, Soderbergh, for example, they aren't necessarily writers. Writing and directing wasn't common when he did it, but Wilder, along with Preston Sturges and John Huston, led the way for a different breed of auteur. From Joseph Mankiewicz to the Coen brothers, Quentin Tarantino, Christopher Nolan, Paul Thomas Anderson, and Jordan Peele.
Wilder shaped every project from the first line, but always with a co-writer, which may reflect how difficult it is to write and direct. We'll be exploring his legendary partnerships with Charles Brackett and I.A.L. Diamond in future episodes.
Wilder was respected, even lionized, by the Hollywood establishment and the international film world, which is all the more remarkable when you think about how far he had to go to get there.
Billy Wilder was born Samuel Wilder on June 22, 1906, in Sucha Beskidzka, a small town in Polish-speaking Galicia, an area that was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and that now covers southeastern Poland and western Ukraine. This was peasant country, where even the landowners were often dirt poor. Now, the Wilders didn't live in Sucha. His parents, Max and Eugenia, were German speaking Jews who operated a chain of railway snack bars and moved from town to town as they ran the family business. They already had one son, Willie, giving little Samuel an older brother.
Wilder's mom was fascinated by American culture and would pass that fascination along to her youngest son, starting with his name. Before she was married, Eugenia spent a half a dozen years in the United States and had seen Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. When she became a mother, she nicknamed her rambunctious red-headed tot Billy, spelled with an I-E at the end, not a Y. So the Billy Wilder we know spent his early years as Billy Wilder.
Some sources say it was Billy the Kid, not Buffalo Bill, that was the source of his name, but, both came from the Wild West. Eventually, the Wilders, but from here on out, I think we'll just call them the Wilders because that's what people are used to hearing. The Wilders settled in Krakow, where Max opened a hotel with the American-sounding name of Hotel City. Billy, now aged 5 or 6, supposedly became a pool shark at the hotel's pool table, with regulars setting up bets against unsuspecting visitors. He also got in trouble for stealing tips from restaurant waiters.
There are lots of colorful stories about Wilder's past out there, and the best ones were invented by the man himself, who never let facts interfere with good anecdotes. It's important to note that because, we're drawing what we know about Wilder from multiple, often contradictory sources. There are times when Wilder admits to the contradictions or reinforces one particular story while a biographer, utterly debunks it. Wilder, and we love him, but Wilder is a raconteur of the first order, and any stories from his life, especially his early life, are often too good not to share, but should be taken with a grain of salt.
In his book On Sunset Boulevard, which is our most significant source for early biographical details, author Ed Sikov spends a lot of time debunking stories from previous books and trying to verify stories Wilder told throughout his life. Wilder, always tinkering with his fictional stories, kept tinkering with the factual ones too. But hustling pool and swiping spare change, probably true. Max Wilder lost his business during the upheaval of World War I and began traveling to Vienna, searching for a fresh start. At some point, probably in 1916, he moved his whole family there on the other side of the Carpathian Mountains, and this is where Billy's story really begins.
Many Jews fleeing war and anti-Semitism kept right on going to the United States, but for some reason, the Wilders didn't. And while Vienna was more welcoming than Krakow, they were still Jews in a Roman Catholic country.
And they were refugees. Vienna may have been the center of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but it was an empire about to collapse. The family suffered hardship and hunger during the war. Wilder would later share memories of waiting, all day in line for food. And, Sikov suggests that Wilder's cynical worldview was formed at the age of 12 when, on November 11th, 1918, he watched this empire finally fall after an enormous cost in human life during a war that had been fought for no good reason.
And speaking of fostering a cynical worldview at a young age, this would have been around the same time that young Wilder discovered a letter addressed to his father, Max, a letter written by his mistress informing him she had just given birth to their child. Billy was horrified, but Max forced him to keep what he knew between just the two of them.
Wow. Yeah, talk about a formative moment.
Oof.
In German, a Wilder is a savage, a barbarian, literally a wild man. The expression tobt wie ein Wilder more or less translates as he's going berserk. Now, I don't believe in nominative determinism, or maybe I do, because by all accounts, Billy Wilder was a restless and easily bored kid who got in a lot of trouble. He claimed to have stolen cars as a teenager, which is probably made up, but he did get into trouble for smaller stuff and was definitely a hit and miss student. He was street smart, tough, and loved sports.
He also loved movies. As Sikov put it, quote, "Watching films may have been the only time Wilder sat still," end quote. American movies were easy to find in Vienna after the war, and Wilder was hooked. He liked Western stars like Tom Mix and my favorite, at least my favorite name, Hoot Gibson, William S. Hart, and he especially loved the dashing Douglas Fairbanks. His hormones raging, Wilder took a girl to a film called Storms of Passion, starring Emil Jannings and Asta Nielsen, and tried to get right to second base. But the girl screamed. Before we go any further, I want to remind listeners that one of the best ways they can support our efforts here on the Filmographers is to leave us a rating or review on your platform of choice. I can't stress it enough. Those reviews bolster our listenership and enable us to continue our deep dives into film history like the episode you're listening to right now.
Have a movie-loving friend? Tell them about the Filmographers. Word of mouth is our greatest ally.
You can direct them to our website, filmographerspodcast.com, or even better, to our Patreon, the best place we can connect more closely to you, our valued listeners. You can find us at patreon.com/thefilmographerspodcast. Now, back to Billy Wilder.
By the mid-1920s, the Wilders weren't doing great. Their application to become Austrian citizens had been denied, and Max had moved from one business scheme to another. He at one point got into the trout hatching business, even though he knew nothing about fish. That scheme, like all the others, failed. Billy, then 18 years old, needed to find his own way in the world. He loved jazz music, dancing, and movies, but a film career seemed impossible in the tiny Austrian film industry. He had, however, seen an American newsreel that made him decide he wanted to be a journalist. Apparently, he liked the way they were dressed. He found his opportunity at a pair of tabloids called Die Bühne and Die Stunde, or The Stage and The Hour. But even though he offered to work for free, they turned him down. And not only that, they published their rejection in the paper.
which is crazy that they would be so adamant about rejecting him that they publicly rejected him as well. Privately wasn't enough. That had to hurt.
It seems like a very German thing, right? we're gonna tell you no in front of everybody.
Schadenfreude.
Fortunately, Wilder never lacked confidence. There's a story he used to tell about how one of his high school teachers had given him a letter of introduction to one Herr Liebstockel, the chief drama critic of Die Bühne. According to Wilder, he went to visit Liebstockel at his office and accidentally walked in on him having sex with his secretary. Liebstockel then hired Wilder to keep him quiet. And again, great story. The truth is that he started the only place he could, writing crossword puzzles. Eventually, he graduated to bigger and better things. And although in later life, he often talked about, having covered murders or suicides, he covered a lot more sports than crime.
One day, in August 1925, he got his first view of a film set when he interviewed Robert Vena, director of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, who was then filming Der Rosenkavalier. Keir, do it for me. I can't do this.
Der Rosenkavalier.
Really? Oh, that was simpler than I thought. Okay. Anyway, Der Rosenkavalier. The exhausted director told reporters, quote, "This is no profession for me," end quote. But Wilder was not deterred. Quote, "Film is the future. One has to do it," Wilder told one of his buddies. There's another quote, "You can make money with it."
I always love the hubris of an aspiring artist who's like, I can make money in the arts. Someday I'll tell the story about how I became a novelist to make money. At any rate.
Don't we all?
Wilder also made an important film friend, a Hungarian named Laszlo Lowenstein, or Lowenstein. Vienna is famous for its cafe culture, and cafes were even more important back then when poverty meant that many people didn't have much more than a bed or a room to go back home to. Cafes were hangouts, meeting places, and intellectual hotbeds. Wilder frequented several, including Café Herrenhof, which is likely where he met Lowenstein, a man with bugged out eyes and a distinctive nasal voice. Lowenstein would, of course, later reinvent himself as Peter Lorre.
I thought and hoped you could assist me. The ornament is a statuette. Black figure of a bird. I am prepared to pay on behalf of the figure's rightful owner the sum of $5,000 for its recovery. I am prepared to promise that, what is the phrase? No questions will be asked.
I love that so much, especially since they became friends. Like Wilder and Lorre hanging out. Like, what's better? Well, I'll tell you what's better, because apparently they were life of the party type. So what would be better than just them being friends would probably be attending a party with the both of them.
Yes, that would absolutely be better. We've got to keep digging. Hopefully we can find some firsthand accounts of them hanging out together. Now, by the start of 1926, Wilder was an experienced journalist. He even profiled film star Asta Nielsen, who had been on screen during his ill-fated attempt to get to second base. He was starting to write more and more interesting stuff, like a piece about hunger artists, people who starved themselves for money. And there's a Kafka short story about that, if anybody wants to follow up. And an English all-female swing band that was passing through on its way to Berlin.
And that story, of course, sounds a lot like the basis for Some Like It Hot, a movie Wilder would write and direct over 3 decades later.
Indeed, it does. Anyway, the publisher of Die Bühne and Die Stunde was also a shakedown artist, threatening restaurants with bad reviews if they didn't buy ads. And it's possible that Wilder, as a restaurant reviewer, participated at some level.
Also worth noting, Wilder is never particularly moralistic about crime in his films. Many call his movies cynical, but as we're beginning to learn Wilder, for him, it's not cynicism. His dark views of human nature are much closer to honesty, at least from his point of view.
When Wilder's publisher fled the country in June 1926, he knew his days as a journalist might be numbered. But with excellent timing, American jazz band leader Paul Whiteman arrived in Vienna, which provided an opportunity for Wilder. He loved jazz already, and he was a fan of Whiteman, and apparently the feeling was mutual. They hit it off, and after palling around Vienna, Whiteman invited Wilder to accompany the band to Berlin. So, after a year and a half of being a reporter, and still only 20 years old, Wilder blew town with a jazz band. It was supposed to be a 2 or 3 day trip, but Wilder never moved back. Wilder's association with Whiteman was short-lived, but it did lead to his first writing gig in Berlin, a profile of the bandleader for the Berliner Zeitung am Mittag, or BZ, BZ. Locals referred to it just by its initials. Berlin was a real big city where life moved fast and citizens were cynical, and Wilder loved it. There were plenty of newspapers and, better yet, plenty of cafes.
There were cheap cafes and fancy cafes, and each cafe had a particular crowd, where there was film people like Ernst Lubitsch, or actors, or novelists, or journalists, or intellectuals, etc. Wilder gravitated towards the Romanisches cafe, which was popular with broke bohemian artists.
Wilder fit right in with the broke people because he was sleeping on couches and he wasn't getting a ton of freelance work. By the end of 1926, he was so desperate that he became a gigolo.
I'm just a gigolo, and everywhere I go, people know the part I'm playing.
Well, that's not strictly accurate. I guess he was more of a private dancer.
I'm your private dancer, a dancer for money. Do what you want me to do.
As the story goes, he was standing on a street corner in the rain when he ran into an old acquaintance from Vienna. This guy had a job as an Eintanzer, which was basically a dime-a-dance partner for lonely old ladies who were either widowed or whose husbands wouldn't or couldn't dance with them. Billy went right over to the dance hall and got the job.
Later in life, Wilder would joke that women would come into these establishments and say, "Waiter, bring me a dancer."
Yes, right after the appetizer. One of the women Wilder danced with was an actress, Carla Nair, whose husband was a novelist and composer who went by the pen name Klabund. He couldn't dance because his tuberculosis made him short of breath.
Oh man, that sounds like a movie. Sounds like a German silent movie, Keir.
When Klabund learned Wilder was a writer, he suggested writing about his new profession. Now, Wilder only danced for a couple of months, but he earned the money to get back on his feet, some stories for the future, and material for his articles. BZ started publishing them in January 1927. The book Billy Wilder on Assignment includes these and other journalistic efforts, giving Wilder Stans some insight into his early prose. And I'll just share a short passage, which I think gives people a little bit of an idea. I make my living honestly and with difficulty, because I dance honestly and conscientiously. No wishes, no desires, no thoughts, no opinions, no heart, no brain. All that matters here are my legs, which belong to this treadmill, and on which they have to stomp, in rhythm, tirelessly, endlessly, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I dance with young and old, with the very short and those who are 2 heads taller than I, with the pretty and less attractive, with the very slender and those who drink teas designed to slim them down, with ladies who send the waiter to get me and savor the tango with eyes closed in rapture, with wives, with fashion plates sporting black-rimmed monocles, and whose escorts, themselves utterly unable to dance, hire me, with painfully inept out-of-towners who think an excursion to Berlin would be pointless without 5 o'clock tea, with splendid women from abroad who divide their stay in Berlin between hotel rooms, halls, and ballrooms, with ladies who are there every day and no one knows where they're from and where they're going, with 1,000 kinds. These articles caused a minor scandal and led to more work for Wilder, who restocked his wardrobe and cut a dashing figure as a cocky young man with a tilted hat, more and more American in style.
It's worth noting that Wilder was known to be a wonderful dancer. From his time in Germany through his entire life, Wilder was more than capable of cutting a rug. As for his writing, it was improving, and he was also getting closer to the film industry. He interviewed child star Jackie Coogan, and his nosy questions about who was handling the kids' finances got him kicked out of the room. His instincts were right, though. Coogan's parents were misusing the son's money.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Bad parents all over these stories.
For sure.
Wilder around this time also met Karl Mayr, who had written some of the biggest German hits, including Weine's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Murnau's The Last Man. Mayr was a morose man, but Wilder made him laugh, and Wilder learned from Mayr. Wilder's memories of breaking into screenwriting are, as you'd expect, both contradictory and embellished. But it's clear he'd met a number of screenwriters at his time at these cafes who helped him get ghostwriting gigs. Berliners really looked down on ghostwriters, and Wilder may have resented working without credit, but work was work.
During this time, he met Joe Pasternak, the head of Universal Films' Berlin office, who set him up as the German tour guide for director Alan Dwan and his wife. Dwan worked from 1912 to 1961 and eventually directed over 120 films. Wilder, of course, didn't know anything about Germany outside of Berlin, but that didn't stop him from making up facts about everything they saw. When Dwan finally caught on, Wilder was fired.
This is great. So according to legend, Wilder was showing Dwan around a centuries-old castle, bullshitting his way through its entire history, when an actual tour guide outed Wilder as being a fraud, and Dwan lost his cool and fired Wilder on the spot.
It sounds like something out of a Wilder movie. And yet another story alleges that Wilder was trying to make it with Dwan's wife. Dwan found out and then had Wilder fired.
Neither might be true. Both might be true. We don't know. It's knowing Wilder, it's very possible that actually both are true. I would bet on both. Bullshitting and trying to make it with a famous director's wife. He'd do it both.
They're very
But
much in keeping. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Regardless of what's true and what's not, Dwan did introduce Wilder to martinis, which became a lifelong love of his. So it wasn't a total loss.
Not at all. One tragic note from 1928 is that when Max Wilder came to see Billy in Berlin, the purpose of that trip is unclear. His already poor health gave out, and he died in Wilder's arms in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Actually, that's probably not true. He probably didn't die in his arms because I don't think they were that close. But regardless, Wilder was in the ambulance with his father when he died. Billy didn't have enough money to send the body home or even enough money to call his brother, who was living in New York, to ask him for money. So he buried his father in Berlin. Wilder's love of comedy is all the more amazing when you think about how much tragedy he saw during his life.
It's no coincidence that every great comedian is sitting on one great trauma or another. In 1929, though, Wilder got a break. Carl Laemmle, head of Universal in Hollywood, had a nephew named Ernest who wanted to learn to direct, so he sent Ernest to Berlin along with Eddie Polo in Over the Hill Western Star. Joe Pasternak needed a project, and he needed it quick. But expectations were probably low, which is why Wilder, a writer with no credits to his name, was hired to pen his first script.
Der Teufelsreporter, or The Daredevil Reporter, was a silent film with a zany premise about a journalist who rescues a group of American girls who are kidnapped by gangsters. There's an element of sex comedy, too. The kidnappers keep the girls from escaping by making them strip down to their underwear. Womp womp. Wilder may have used himself as the model for the daring reporter, but he was under no illusions about the quality of the film. Later in life, he spoke of this and almost all of his German scripts with contempt, if he talked about them at all. A sample quote would be, "Do I have to talk about them? They were all lousy." Nonetheless, the film opened on June 19th, 1929, and Wilder was on his way.
Now, I know we're throwing out a lot of names and dates, but there's one tidbit you're definitely going to want to file away. In April 1929, Wilder wrote a profile of Erich von Stroheim, the eccentric director whose epic movie Greed had caused a scandal 3 years earlier. Wilder mentioned the film Stroheim was currently working on, Queen Kelly, which starred silent film star Gloria Swanson. Wrote Wilder, "La Swanson is playing the madam of a brothel. The movie will be great." Now, we don't know if his prediction would have come true because Queen Kelly was never finished. But Swanson, Stroheim, and some footage from Queen Kelly would all appear a couple of decades later in one of Wilder's greatest films.
Von Stroheim had moved to Hollywood way back in 1914. Murnau and Lubitsch had already moved there too, but small fry Billy Wilder was stuck in Berlin. They did make a lot of movies in Berlin, most of them at UFA, short for Universum Film Aktiengesellschaft, which was the biggest film studio outside Hollywood. But big budget movies like The Last Man and Metropolis had almost bankrupted UFA. After a failed attempt to limit film imports and protect the German film market, they had been forced to borrow money from Hollywood studios, which in turn forced them to open their theater chains to Hollywood pictures. They tried to offset their losses by exporting German films to Hollywood, but as it is now with foreign films, American moviegoers stayed away in droves.
The word for no is
Nein. Nein.
Now you try it.
Nein.
In 1929, UFA was under new ownership, Nazi-sympathizing ownership. Still, UFA was leaning into crowd-pleasing costume dramas and comedies, but also something known as cross-section films. Popular all across Europe, these were basically pseudo-documentaries, light on plot, sometimes incorporating stock footage, showing vignettes of the life of the common folk. Ordinary people loved seeing themselves on screen, and some cross-section films were very successful. They were also cheap to make. So Wilder and his pals from the cafe figured they could make one too, casting everyday Berliners and shooting almost everything on location. Billy joined a ragtag group of filmmakers who came together to make Menschen am Sonntag, or People on Sunday. Although he was billed as a writer, according to the film's star, he spent most of his time as a lighting assistant, holding a silver board to bounce sunlight onto the actors. She also said the film was, in reality, largely improvised. But among the filmmakers was assistant director Robert Siodmak, who would go on to direct some classic Hollywood noirs like The Killers and Criss Cross.
Siodmak's partner in directing was Edgar G. Ulmer, a man who has a fascinating career in his own right. He directed Black Cat and Detour, two absolute classics and movies that I love, but basically committed career suicide by carrying on an affair with Shirley Beatrice, who just so happened to be married to Max Alexander, nephew of Universal head honcho Carl Laemmle.
Whoops.
Yeah, whoops, indeed. Uncle Carl was known for hiring anyone from his family. Hell, he even hired people who said they were in his family. But, which is such an amazing story. He would, everybody on the lot at Universal would call him Uncle Carl. So literally, he had a massive family. He didn't know who was actually members of his family and who weren't, but people called him Uncle Carl, and he really did. According to some legend, hired some people who were not in his family but said they were. Anyway,
I love it.
I love that. Yeah, but that said, despite its breadth, cross anyone in the Laemmle clan, and you invited Carl's wrath, which is exactly what, unfortunately, Ulmer did.
Getting back to People on Sunday, even the lowly PA was none other than Fred Zinnemann, future director of High Noon, From Here to Eternity, Oklahoma, A Man for All Seasons, Day of the Jackal. Phew.
Yeah, that's phew, indeed. That's a lot. Well, I guess you could say mid-century America got a lot of German scientists and a lot of German filmmakers too. I guess you can say, I'm sorry, Keir, but I'm going to say this anyway. I guess you can say both of them made a lot of bombs.
Dad joke alert. We're back, people.
Oh, man.
Now, People on Sunday was a true indie film with all the challenges that entails. Inexperience, a low budget, crew members quitting, and filmmakers bickering about who deserved credit for what. They even lost a reel of exposed film on a public bus.
Some things never change, and I'm glad to hear that one of them is indie filmmaking. In all, it took 9 months to film and edit People on Sunday. Wilder and Company sold it to UFA, who released it on February 4th, 1930, and it was a hit. It didn't have a plot, but it did feel like real life, and that's what audiences wanted. The movie was, over a decade ahead of Italian neorealism. Keir, you've seen the movie, haven't you?
I have. I recently watched it, and it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. It's also fairly enjoyable to watch. It's the camera work is interesting. I'm always a sucker for stuff that just kind of depicts, I can just sit there and watch little clips of, people driving along some historical street. And, I'm just curious about what things looked like at the time. And there's a lot of just kind of great documentary footage of Berlin. And there is a little story. It's basically about a double date on a lake outside Berlin. And the four people that play the main roles in the film, there are actually 5 actors. One of them has kind of a comic role in that she spends the whole day in bed while the rest of them have this little double date. They were who they're purported to be in the film. The woman who's kind of considered the lead, there's a short documentary made about her that came out a while back. She was actually a clerk in it was called an Electrolux shop. They sold like record players and things like that. And that was her job in real life. And that's who she played in the film. And, they're not great actors, but they're competent actors, I guess, for this story. And it just kind of tells the story of this. It sort of starts the day before Sunday. So it starts on Saturday and ends on Monday, but most of it is just this silly date on Sunday. And you can kind of look at it on the one hand as this sort of charming, if dated, kind of romance, because there's a little bit of a romance in it. There's some hurt feelings, and this woman who thinks this guy is interested in her, actually finds out that he gets together with her friend. But like a lot of later Wilder stuff, there is also kind of a cynical core to it, because the women aren't ultimately treated very well. At the end, the guy's kind of like, oh, well, forget about them. And also, you could sort of look at it as saying, like, yeah, these Berliners get this one day to do whatever they want, but man, they're working 6 days a week, and it's really a grind. There are some strange social customs in it. These men play a spanking game at one point that I was like, that's got to be a weird German thing. I don't know what they're doing. These guys are like laughing and spanking each other, and there's I couldn't figure out what that was going on. And it's also a little bit eerie knowing what is to come. Again, 1930, right? The Nazi Party is in the ensuing years is going to rise to power. This is going to become a totalitarian state. I couldn't help myself that at times I remember looking at some of these people and I was like, oh, he looks like such a nice guy. I wonder if he was a Nazi. I wonder if he became a Nazi. And, not everybody in Germany obviously went along with it, but most of them did. So it's a very fascinating document. I encourage people to check it out. If you want to do a super deep dive on Wilder, it is available. There's a Criterion DVD, not Blu-ray, that I was able to purchase, still new, from Amazon for a reasonable price. So very fascinating.
I would like to, it is something we explore because it's interesting, because we're going to talk about this a lot, but what you brought up about like the infidelity and the romance and what it is in People on Sunday. And I know this was a collaborative effort, but there is a thread throughout Wilder's career, and he talks openly about this, about romance and love being fundamentally transactional. And we didn't talk about this. I don't think there's a lot to talk about, but Wilder did pick up many prostitutes in his youth, according to him. And sometimes he was so poor, he didn't have a proper place to stay, but still had enough money for a hooker. But he would just have sex in alleys with prostitutes. And I think, again, we're looking at the rudiment and the fundamental things of Wilder's life. And a lot of it is literally paying for love. And it's interesting to see even his earlier movies where he's not directly responsible or the person responsible, there's still those elements. And wasn't there, I heard there's a scene in People on Sunday where they have, two people, make love in the park, and the woman has like a pine cone stuck to her or something like that, and she shakes it off afterwards, and it's kind of a gag, but it's so much there's in the throes of passion, that just doesn't bother her so much. It's just, there's interesting things like that.
And well, later films get a lot more circumspect about sex content. When they cut to the kind of post lovemaking scene, they have so clearly had sex. This woman is lying there just spent, and yes, there's a pine cone under her back. But it's fascinating because, again, we discussed this in our Patreon episode of Ninotchka, which, if you would like to hear that, join our Patreon at any level, and you can listen to our Patreon on Ninotchka, which is a film Wilder co-wrote for the great Ernst Lubitsch. But we talk about how, a lot of the kind of sex content in films of this era was very sly. It was a little more forthcoming in People on Sunday. Very interesting to see.
I regret not watching it, but I still can't, luckily, because like you said, it's available on Criterion. I think, as a matter of fact, it's also streaming on the Criterion channel. And you should also go to patreon.com/the Filmographers podcast or filmographers.com, which is our website.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that although Wilder's final marriage did seem to be a truly happy one, and for the final decades of his life, he was a dog throughout most of his life. He slept with lots of women. He cheated on people. He was not an easy guy in relationships, nor a particularly great guy in relationships.
No, not a good partner. No.
The most immediate beneficiary of People on Sunday's success was Robert Siodmak, who was hired by Robert Liebman, the head of the story department at UFA. Liebman was also known for hiring ghostwriters to write under his own name as Robert Liebman, but he didn't often take chances on young talent. Wilder was bitter that he had been passed over. And as one version of the story goes, one day at the Romanisches Cafe, he was bitching about this, and Liebman in particular, when the big guy in front of him turned around and said, "I'm Liebman. If you're only 1% as talented in your writing as you are in shooting off your mouth, I might give you some work." Well, he got the work, and he was once again paired with Siodmak. They reported to head of production Eric Palmer, who apparently tossed coins to writers who came up with good ideas. And Wilder, as we know, didn't like to sit still, so he would pace in front of the desk, which put him in a good, and he also would fire off a lot of ideas, which put him in pole position to catch the most coins.
Dance, writer, dance.
Yeah, how humiliating.
Oh boy, the life of a writer, so glamorous. Anyway, Wilder was now part of a film studio machine, working on deadline to crank out scripts that were messengered to the UFA production facilities at Balbersburg and Tempelhof. Balbersburg, by the way, is still operating, and it's the oldest large-scale film production studio in the world. Some of Wilder's work was credited, and some of it wasn't. But the most important thing was that he was working. Excuse me. This was a time of upheaval in Germany. In 1929, silent films were king, but in 1930, sound films took over. Also, the U.S. stock market crash of 1929 was breaking the fragile German economy. In January 1930, unemployment went up by 1 million. And in September, the National Socialist Party, aka the Nazis, surprised everyone with an out-of-nowhere win. Overnight, they became the second biggest political party in Germany. Their paramilitary organization, the Sturmabteilung, or SA, or Brown Shirts, were emboldened to step up their campaign of intimidation. Street fights with communists were common. Shopkeepers were attacked if they didn't sell Strum, the Nazi brand of cigarettes, and of course, Jews, gypsies, and gays were threatened with violence. But the filmmakers of Berlin were still frantically doing what they did best, making movies. Keir, if someone's coming to Chicago, what's one place they have to visit?
Mike, no one should leave town without stopping by Exile in Bookville, the city's most beautiful and carefully curated bookstore. It's located on the second floor of the historic Fine Arts Building at 410 South Michigan Avenue.
Hey, didn't you write a book about the Fine Arts Building?
Why, yes, I did. It's called Chicago's Fine Arts Building, Music, Magic, and Murder, and you can find it at Exile.
Exile is the best. Wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling books, all lovingly selected by owners Javier and Kristen Ramirez. I guarantee you'll find something to read.
Their strong suit may be general and literary fiction, but I particularly love the middle room. That's where I find graphic novels as well as books about art and music, cooking and cocktails, and our personal favorite, books about movies.
Javier and Kristen were kind enough to let the Filmographers recommend our favorites, so stop by and see what we selected.
I wrote a shelf talker for one of my all-time favorites, Kyle Buchanan's Blood, Sweat, and Chrome, the wild and true story of Mad Max Fury Road.
They also stocked one of my faves, Sam Wasson's The Big Goodbye, Chinatown, and the Last Years of Hollywood.
Exile also has nonfiction, short stories, small press titles, and the very best in modern horror.
Listeners, if you're coming to Chicago, don't leave without visiting Exile in Bookville in the Fine Arts Building at 410 South Michigan Avenue. But you don't have to come to Chicago. You can find all they have to offer at exileinbookville.com.
Because there's more to life than movies. There are also books.
About movies.
Wilder's next script was a weird one, but worth mentioning for its lingering impact. Directed by Siodmak, Der Mann, der seinen Mörder sucht, or The Man Who Sought His Own Murderer, opens with a guy whose suicide attempt is foiled by a burglar, but then hires the burglar to kill him in exchange for his insurance money. Wilder and Siodmak thought The Man Who Sought His Own Murderer was hilarious, but the studio and audiences didn't agree. It bombed. In spite of that, it's been loosely remade 4 different times as DOA, 1950, Color Me Dead, 1969, the remake of DOA, 1988, and I Hired a Contract Killer, 1990. And I have only seen the 2 DOA versions. I'll have to check out the others.
Yeah, great concept.
Siodmak and Wilder had a falling out, but Wilder kept writing. By some accounts, Wilder wrote over 200 spec scripts during this period, which is insane. One of those scripts Ihre Hoheit befiehlt, or Her Highness orders, was bought by Fox and remade in Hollywood as Adorable, giving Wilder his first American screen credit. He also performed rewrites on the adaptation of a well-known children's book, Emil and the Detectives. The first draft was written by Emmerich Pressburger, who not only became one of Wilder's close friends, but went on to form a long-standing and wonderful creative partnership with Michael Powell.
One of the greatest partnerships in film history. As for Emil and the Detectives, I haven't seen it. It's impossible to find, but it sounds like it's ahead of its time. A thief gives a kid hallucinogenic drugs in order to steal his money.
There were wilder times back then, but hey, that's nothing. In William Bowen's 1921 Newbery Honor book, The Old Tobacco Shop, a kid dreams he's on a wonderful adventure after smoking magic tobacco.
Puff the Magic Dragon.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
At that time, comedies and musicals were in style, and Wilder found himself obliged to shoehorn songs into every story, whether the story needed them or not. Around this time, he wrote A Blonde Dream, maybe his first buddy movie about two pals competing for the same girl, and managed to shoehorn a little social commentary along with the hijinks. He also worked with his friend Peter Lorre on a film called What Women Dream. Given their long careers, it's a little shocking that this is the only time the two of them were on the same film. Now, Wilder did well in 1931 and in 1932, doing mostly uncredited work, but making good money. He had a fast car, nice clothes, a stylish apartment decorated with designer furniture and modern art. He started carrying a walking stick and wearing his hat indoors, and even though he himself was kind of a normie, enjoyed hanging out in edgy nightclubs. But by various accounts, no matter how well he did, he never seemed satisfied. Writes Sikov, quote, Billy Wilder had a sort of heartburn of the soul. He looked at life, and no matter what he did, no matter how many friends he had or how many screenplays he sold, on some level, he just couldn't stomach it, end quote.
All around him, the Nazis were continuing their rise to power. And on the film, Madame wünscht keine Kinder, or Madame Doesn't Want Children, he was forced to work with Hans Steinhoff, an out-and-out Nazi who had directed one of the most influential Nazi propaganda films. But Berlin was still a city of Jews and culture, and a city Hitler despised, so the filmmaking went on because regular people were still desperate to see movies. Until 1933, when everything changed.
The sun on the meadow is summery one. The stag in the forest runs free. But gather together to greet the storm. Tomorrow belongs to me. The branch of the linden is leafy and green. The Rhine gives its gold to the sea. But somewhere a glory awaits unseen. Tomorrow belongs to me.
And that creepy song, of course, is from the 1972 movie Cabaret, directed by Bob Fosse, about the end of the Weimar Republic and the rise of the Nazis. Nothing to do with Wilder, but it seemed appropriate.
Wilder was skiing with his girlfriend, Hella Hartwig, in Davos during January 1933 when they stopped at a chalet for a meal. There was a radio playing, and on it, they heard the news that Hindenburg had appointed Hitler chancellor. I think it's time to leave, said Wilder, to which Hella replied, I'd like to have some coffee and pastry first. He tried to explain that he didn't mean leave the chalet. He meant leave Germany. At least that's how one version of the story goes.
According to another version of the story, on February 27th, they were dining out in Berlin when they saw the red glow of flames from the burning Reichstag, the seat of German parliament. Hitler had just been sworn in as chancellor, and he used the arson as a pretense to claim communists were plotting against Germany. That led to a suspension of civil liberties, giving the Nazis a stranglehold on the country. And that is when Wilder knew they had to go.
But late in life, Wilder told Cameron Crowe that he knew it was time when he saw a large group of SS officers savagely beating a defenseless old Jewish man.
Whatever the inciting incident really was, as Wilder later quipped, it wasn't his idea to leave, it was Hitler's. For the second time, Wilder was forced to abandon his growing success and flee, this time from a city he really loved. And he was not alone. Among the 50,000 people who escaped Germany in 1933 were a great many filmmakers, actors, artists, and other creatives. Wilder didn't have the creative or financial capital to reach the US, so he went to Paris to start over.
Naturally, everybody wanted to go to Hollywood, but it was the advent of Mr. Hitler that made us go into exile, which ultimately would lead many of us to Hollywood. When it became apparent that Hitler was going to take over and what his politics are, and that it's going to be impossible for any of us to work, the exodus started. Some, afraid that they could not speak any other language but German, went to Prague, some went to Vienna, but they were just fooling themselves because Hitler followed them and took over those countries very quickly. I myself, I went to Paris and I spent about a year there in Paris, made one picture with Daniel Darieux, who was very, very young then, called Mauvaise Graine.
Was it a comedy?
No, it was a serious picture.
With a single suitcase and $1,000 hidden in his hat, Wilder checked into the Ansonia, a flea-bitten hotel where a number of other German exiles were staying. One of them was composer Franz Waxman, who would one day, as Franz Waxman in Hollywood, win an award for his Sunset Boulevard score. He would also do Stalag 17 and The Spirit of St. Louis with Wilder, and one of my favorite scores, The Bride of Frankenstein.
I'm surprised he didn't change his Franz to Frank. Then he could have really Frank Waxman.
Like a carpenter.
The Ansonia hotel residents were broke, bored, and depressed. But when they weren't complaining, they wondered if they could somehow make a movie despite their circumstances. And this led to Wilder's first directorial effort, Mauvaise Graine, which translates as bad seed.
Like People on Sunday, they planned something that could mostly be shot outdoors. What they came up with was a story about car thieves. This movie also deserves its own Patreon exclusive episode, and we may give it that. But one of the most fascinating things about it was, despite his usual self-confidence and ambition, Wilder apparently doubted his own ability to direct a movie. So when he got the chance to co-direct with Alexander Eastway, an experienced director, he took it. And like his later movies, he co-wrote the script working with Jan Lustig and Max Kolb. Franz Waxman contributed music.
And this was another, was fortunate to watch this just last night. It is not a great movie. It's not a lost gem. The story is kind of hokey. It's about a rich guy who just loves his car, loves driving his fast, cool flash car and picking up girls. Then his sober doctor father takes his car away from him. So he's hoofing along the pavement when he sees his car yet again on the curb. The new owners have left the keys in it. He steals it, and he's observed by a gang of car thieves who tell him, butt out of it. We're the car thieves in this town. You can't do it. But then he becomes a friend with one of the young car thieves, and then he falls for that young car thief's sister. So he becomes a car thief, and yada, yada, yada. What's notable about this movie is its look. Wilder, and it's hard to say how much of this was the work of the the filmographer of the cinematographer.
We did it.
We did it. Thank you. It's hard to say how much is the work of the cinematographer, but it has a real visual panache. It starts with an image of a moving wheel, which is like, wow, starts with a bang. There's a lot of really interesting kind of process effect going on where stuff that I kind of didn't know they could have pulled off back then on a low budget, like overlapping images and some very kind of creative visual stuff. But most of all, the impression that I was left with was this feeling of motion. They put the camera in the back of the car so much, including a car that's moving much faster than the traffic around it. It is anything but just static. It is moving. It is the cars drive fast. There's lots of shots of cars driving quickly into this garage and slamming on the brakes at the last minute. So it's very dynamic visually, much more so than in the storytelling. And so again, worth checking out. It's available on a DVD that has another kind of Lost French classic on it or something. I'm not sure if it's even streaming. We'll include information about how to watch these movies in the show notes. So for the Wilderologists out there, worth a gander.
It's also worth, I think it was Sikov, I forget exactly who, so I'm kind of cribbing this a little bit, but noted the really unique visual style of the film, Keir, as you're saying. And what's kind of cool is that, we mentioned this in the Patreon episode as well on Ninochka, that Lubitsch also had a very similar dynamic visual style of moving the camera a lot, having a very good sense of composition, having a good idea of how to handle characters and move them within the frame. Just really strong visual sense, as you should have as a director, but it was certainly less common at this time. So it's very interesting to see that Wilder had this, why you say there's a lot of limitations in the movie, but also had a really interesting, just this burgeoning visual style, which, he doesn't get enough credit for. I'm sure we're going to talk about that a lot this season, but Wilder as a director was also very, very good.
Absolutely. The confidence with which this film is made is really, again, he said he didn't feel confident enough to do it. And so, maybe the cinematographer gets some credit. Maybe Alexander Esway gets some credit because he was a little more experienced. But some accounts say that Esway wasn't really that big a part of the film. I think we do have to give Wilder some credit for, seizing this opportunity and really running with it and maybe his nerves dissipated once they started filming. It's hard to say, but Wilder later in his career would often claim that he wasn't interested in showy visual stuff. There is a lot of showy visual stuff in this, and he certainly developed a confident visual style, even though he didn't like to draw attention to it later on.
When Bad Seed came out in 1934, Wilder was no longer in Paris to even see it. But I have to wonder whether Jean-Luc Godard ever saw a print. Films in the French New Wave like Breathless and Truffaut Shoot the Piano Player, a movie that I absolutely love, may owe a debt to the loose and freewheeling film that from 2.5 decades earlier. Like he was with Italian neorealism and People on Sunday, Wilder was ahead of culture, and this wouldn't be the last time.
Even working with the co-director, Wilder found the experience so stressful that he vowed never to direct again. Famous last words. He kept writing scripts, sending them to an UFA contact who is now in LA working as a producer for Columbia Pictures. One of these scripts, Pam Pam, a musical that used a similar structure to Bad Seed, got picked up for production. And in December 1933, Wilder received a telegram sharing the good news. The studio offered him a princely sum of $150 a week to write the screenplay for the U.S. production and a one-way ticket to the States.
With the Nazis on the rise and with Wilder's family scattered around Europe, his mom had remarried in Vienna and his brother was not in Europe but was in the US, and they hadn't seen each other for more than a decade. Wilder decided there was nothing keeping him in Paris. And for the third and final time, he left a city just as he was starting to get it together. His next stop, Hollywood.
Hooray for Hollywood. That's gooey ballyhooly Hollywood, where any office boy or young mechanic can be a panic with just a good-looking pan.
And any shop girl can be a top girl if she pleases the tired businessman.
Hooray for Hollywood! You may be homely in your neighborhood.
Bum, 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 bum. To be an actor, see Mr. Factor, you make your kisser look good.
Go out and try your luck, you may be Donald Duck. Hooray for Hollywood!
Wilder undoubtedly saw terrible things as the Nazis rose to power, and his mother, stepfather, and grandmother would all be victims of the Nazis. In the novel Mr. Wilder and Me, author Jonathan Coe suggests the concentration camps were a powerful subterranean force in Wilder's life and art. But Wilder rarely spoke of this time, and while he did address the war in his movies, it doesn't show up as a driving theme or influence in his work. He never made a Casablanca, a To Be or Not to Be, or a Schindler's List. He did almost make a romantic comedy called Heil Darling, but that's a story for another day. What Wilder did, whether to deal with trauma or not, was to make audiences laugh consistently for the next few decades. Join us in 2 weeks when we'll start our season in earnest with his first Hollywood picture, The Major and the Minor.
If you're a member of our Patreon community, you don't even have to wait that long. There's another full episode waiting for you right now. In it, Keir and I share the story behind the great Ernst Lubitsch's 1939 comedy Ninotchka, starring Greta Garbo and co-written by, you guessed it, Billy Wilder.
This is one of Wilder's most important screenwriting contributions for Lubitsch, the director who may have been the single greatest influence on him. For most of his career, Wilder had a sign in his office he used to think himself out of jams. How would Lubitsch do it?
We'll find out how Lubitsch did it, and more importantly, how Wilder did it all season long. Our examination of Ninotchka is just one of the many deep dives we'll be sharing with our Patreon members. Our regular episodes will chronicle the films Wilder wrote and directed in Hollywood, one by one, in chronological order. But on Patreon, we'll be looking at other films where he played an important role. We'll record our own commentary tracks, we'll talk to famous fans of Wilder, and we'll even have a book club. Thank you for coming along for the ride, and thank you to our fantastic and patient producer, Kevin Lau, for sticking with us too. As always, our theme music was composed and played by Gompson, and our logo and merch is designed by Cosmo Graff.
Join us in 2 weeks for our discussion of Wilder in Hollywood and The Major and the Minor, about a woman who pretends to be 12 years old to buy a cheaper train ticket and wins the man of her dreams. For the life of me, I can't figure out why no one's remade that one.
I can. An idea or two.